presentation today, we'll run through it in a similar way to the last presentation. I'll introduce what we're going to talk about, and then Rod will talk about the framework analysis, and then I'll finish off again. Our presentation really results from some joint work that we've been doing for a number of councils, and we've kind of aimed it at providing councils with a possible framework for considering waste management operations and services in light of possible amalgamations. Waste management has to date been omitted from the priorities and focus areas for the proposed regional strategic plans in the progress of the New South Wales Fit for Future pathway. But given the dollars that are involved and the possible logistic challenges, it could be useful for councils to consider what these possible amalgamations might mean, and to provide a way of going about deciding whether or not to integrate the services in the first place, and then setting up a pathwork for doing that. So, the status of the amalgamations is unknown at this stage, but the presentation will step you through some of the processes that might be useful to consider. And in any event, when councils are considering maybe to regionalise their services or join together to share assets, all of those integration type decisions need to be considered from everybody's point of view. So, is your waste fit for the future? Councils need to ensure that their waste management responsibilities are adequately considered in any strategic planning. So I know that a lot of this is being done at the corporate level, but often the dollars that are involved in your waste budgets should be considered to inform the question of amalgamations in the first place. Those integration questions open up other questions, and those questions around governance and resourcing and administration also need to be considered, and are often very compelling and should be fed up to your corporate level, because this is the on-the-ground sort of stuff. So the first question that we would ask if we came to talk to you would be, should the operations, the services, the assets, should they be integrated? And that opens up all those questions about, is there a benefit for both councils or all of the councils in the group to integrating? Or is there an overriding regional benefit that should compel the councils to pursue integration? Will there be a loss for one council and a gain for another council? How are those worked out between the councils, those losses and benefits? In some cases there can be an overall loss to everybody, and so how are those increased service costs going to be resourced? So how do you go about answering those questions? That's the context from which we have developed the framework. So what we're going to just walk you through today are the steps, and they're broad enough to be applied to any numerous levels and areas of local government responsibility, but we're using waste management as the case study. There's many ways of doing this. We've worked together to bring Marsden Jacobs' strong economic and financial analysis understanding with our waste management understanding to develop a step-by-step approach that can be applied for each council. So what are the steps? Firstly, we need to examine what each council is currently doing and what you might be planning to do. Then we try to identify opportunities or integration possibilities. It might not be all of your services. It might be something like sharing one landfill or something like that. So we look for where the opportunities are and the possibilities. The preliminary steps include, firstly, identifying the assets and liabilities. Then we also, for most councils, have to look at their existing service contracts, and we also try to understand the constraints for each council and the local characteristics of each council. Then we move into analysing the options that might be available and then set a pathway for implementing any integration. So at this point I'll hand over to Rod, who's going to lay out the framework analysis.
I'll pick up a thumbtack on the way so no one steps on it or slips. Good afternoon everyone, I'm Rod Carr, I'm an Associate Director with Marsden Jacob Associates. I'm actually an economist and I do a lot of work in economic and financial analysis, and 10 years in government at New South Wales Treasury and with Australian government previously. What we're talking about here is a framework that really you can engage someone like us to do, or a council could do it themselves. What we're trying to do is lay out a bit of a roadmap as to how you can actually systematically go about this, but do it pretty cost effectively and efficiently rather than spending a lot unnecessary time and money on an analysis. So from here, our framework is actually based on a broader best practice planning framework. And what this is picking up is a list of the range of issues that you need to be thinking about when you're considering integration of operations or councils. Things like really understanding your defined levels of service. Have you got the best information available at this time to undertake this type of analysis? Are your stakeholders partners in this process, or are they going to run against you in this process? How does it fit in the waste cycle? What are the available options? So as Katherine was saying, one of the things you need to think about early in this is what's the options you've got available to you, and then work that through. So there's a range of things in this, and I'm going to talk about a number of these in the following slides. So where do we suggest you start? Well, obviously with the opportunities. And this is just sort of illustrative, basically. But what I've found working with a number of organisations over the years is quite often management starts working with the area of the business that takes up most of their time, which is often admin and overheads and a bit of planning and that sort of thing, when really the big opportunities lie elsewhere. So one of the first things you've got to do is actually step back and go, where actually are the opportunities? Where are the big cost savings that could be made through integration of activities? And have a look at those. If there's something in that that is viable, that is beneficial, then continue the analysis. If there isn't, if you find out that it's unlikely to be a viable or a beneficial outcome, then pull back at that point in time and acknowledge that this isn't actually something that you want to pursue moving forward. Just to illustrate that, oh, actually before I do, sorry, I've used your further promotion of the New South Wales waste avoidance and resource recovery strategy here. But one of the first things you need to do when you're stepping out on this is actually understand what are the pressing infrastructure needs. Your analysis should be quite helpful, I imagine, where that's concerned. But in council, you're going to know anyway. You're going to know where your pressure points are in your local area. And then you've got to be thinking about, well, okay, how do we deliver in the context of strategies that we've got in place? They can be local government strategies, they can be state government strategies. Where are our budget constraints? What are our state government targets that we're trying to achieve? And equally, what are our policy and regulatory initiatives and constraints? This is about identifying both the opportunities, because you may find that there's grant funding available, there's policy initiatives in place that can really support what you're trying to do, or there may be really insurmountable barriers that make it really hard for you to do this, or it just makes sure you're not forgetting something. You know, I've seen some circumstances where I'm from a federal background, but people often forget about the ACCC. And they reach a point in a project and they go, actually, I should have consulted with the ACCC about this because there are issues of competitive neutrality here that I haven't really thought through and that I haven't consulted with them with. And if this becomes a problem, they might stand in the way of what we're actually trying to do here in terms of an initiative. So where do you start? Well, prioritise the opportunities. You've worked out what they are. Do a first pass analysis is what we suggest, and that would be in a cost effectiveness framework. Basically, I'm an economist. We want to look at present values, focusing on costs in the first instance, and work out whether any of these integration options, based on a robust understanding of capital and operating costs, contractual commitments, i.e. when you can actually implement these initiatives, where your assets and liability stocks are at, and what your waste projections look like. Is there something in this? Is there a material gain to the councils and the residents from this? And as Katherine was saying before, are both parties going to win? Or is it a case, as I've seen in a number of circumstances, where one party's going to get ahead and win and another party actually is going to lose out of this. And so an early dialogue needs to happen at that point to say, okay, how do we balance the winners and losers in this? If we can, we've got something we can move forward with. If we don't, again, we've got probably an insurmountable hurdle that's going to be really hard to address. An example of this, as Katherine was talking about, is a landfill. A lot of people look at landfills, and landfills are filling up. They're a constraint in many council areas because they're reaching capacity levels. If you're doing analysis of a landfill, though, a lot of people forget that you're actually not just looking at the landfill. You're looking at the landfill, you're looking at waste projections, you're looking at what other initiatives are happening in terms of diversion rates away from the landfill because of recycling initiatives. You're looking at collection costs, and you're looking at a range of collection cost initiatives. And the reason collection costs are really important in this is because, in my background, I'm also a transport economist as well as working in the waste field. It's amazing how that there are several options, but the costs where transport can concern add up really, really quickly. And they can cruel a project before you know it. And while it may be feasible to transport waste in a bulk form in a B-double when you're travelling and you're carrying 30 or 40 tonnes from Sydney to Queensland, 30 or 40 kilometres at a local government level from one location to another can actually make a dramatic difference in terms of the economics of a project, and can actually result in what you think is a viable project becoming unviable. What do you need to do next? You've worked through and you've done an initial priority assessment. You think there's something that's useful here. You think there's possibly an opportunity. You need to come back together again as council and stakeholders and actually workshop this through. You need to go, have we considered this in its entirety? Have we missed anything? Do we agree? Is there something in this for the two organisations? That collaboration is critical because at the end of the day, it's the guys in the councils who are going to be involved in actually implementing these initiatives, not we consultants who get paid, issue our final invoice and have to move on to the next project, which is a blessing and a curse at some stages, I must admit. You know, I did enjoy in government the way you get carriage of things and the way that you don't as a consultant. So if you've reached a conclusion where you say, yes, this is a good idea, what do you do next? I think you need to do more detailed analysis. Don't leap in. Now is when you actually do more detailed financial analysis, cost-benefit analysis, risk analysis of what you're looking at in the project. Work this through. Make sure that you've thought about things at an adequate level of detail and you've actually got a really good understanding of, is this a really good idea? Because I've seen projects that looked great at the initial cut stage be ruled out when you do the detailed analysis because you've forgotten something really critical, or because as the numbers start firming up, the capital costs involved go up and up and up. So think about that. Think about competitive neutrality issues. That's my 5 minutes. I think I've only got one more to go and then I'm back to Katherine, so we should be okay. And then think about competitive neutrality and then come up with a range of recommendations on what you think are the viable integration alternatives. And at the same time, rule out the ones that aren't and explain why, but also explain, are there likely to be triggers in the future that could see them come online as integration opportunities. Lastly, once you've gone that far, you start moving implementation. You're talking here about governance models. Now, governance models are many and varied, and there are some more being tested at the moment in terms of joint organisations. But in some of the work that we've looked at corporate models that can be used for this with limited by share companies, limited by guarantee companies, and they bring different incentives to the equation if you're going to go down a corporate pathway. Equally, there are a range of merger and joint operations that can be established between councils as well. So think about your governance, think about your resourcing, think about your transition costs, and critically, think about your barriers to implementation. So I'll hand over to Katherine at this point. Thank you.
Thanks, Rod. So you've gotten to the point where you've gone through all of the analysis and you've got what you think you're going to integrate together, or at least a range of options. So once you've maybe come to a recommendation on how to accept what your integration might be, you then, the work's not done. There are other barriers that you need to overcome, and that's what they are. I'll just touch on these very quickly. Contract considerations. Most councils, overriding the implementation of any integration will be a consideration of your existing service contracts. the integration may best be implemented if you align your service contracts, for example. And you understand what I mean here. One council might have weekly food and organics collections next door to, and that would mean you're on fortnightly garbage collections next door to another council that's got weekly collections. So all of those contract considerations need to be brought into the strategic pathway. Another part of that is trying to align your conditions of contract. If you've both got service contracts that have conditions of contract, again, a lot of that will be done at the corporate level, but and you'll need to assess each council's appetite for risk. But all of those things need to be sort of brought into the consideration of how you're going to implement this integration. The strategic endeavours that you're seeking should be at the forefront of how you look at your contracts. I would caution against just extending existing contracts just to align expiry dates. I think all of the strategic considerations need to come into your decision making. For both cases of retendering or renegotiating your contracts, it's important to ensure that your processes adhere to the New South Wales general regulation and, as Rod mentioned, the federal anti-competitive legislation. And more importantly, from our point of view, we want to make sure you're getting value for money. So you need to do a proper analysis when you're considering your existing contracts. Cultural constraints. We are very aware of the sensitivity of some councils' cultural identities, and so often they need to be smoothed out in any reference to integration. So you need to identify those to start with, what those cultural constraints can be. Everybody thinks they're special. So we like to understand what the characteristics of your local government area is and what you want to preserve and what you can be a bit more flexible about. When we go and talk to local councils, of course, the first thing they want to know is how much is it going to cost. It's a bit like how long is a piece of string. It'll all depend on the scope of what you're trying to integrate and what you're looking at, what you've got and what you would like to do. Who is going to oversee the change? Our experience with dealing with regional groups of councils is that they're very much more successful if they have a champion, if somebody drives all the other councils towards the common goal. So you need to identify a champion. Council staff are very busy, particularly in regional areas where they're spread across a number of responsibilities. So if somebody can be allocated the responsibilities of driving the process, that would be helpful. Timing, you can never seem to have enough time to get these processes through. Community consultation is the other barrier that we would note. Waste services is one of those areas that touches everybody, and it can be a real headache for some councils if the community is not happy with the way waste services are delivered and managed. And in terms of the size of waste management in your budgets, it's a very important area to get right. So I'll just put up the contact details for Rod and I. We'd be happy to talk to you. The point we just want to leave you with is to consider what you may need. There is if you've downloaded the Conference Waste app, I think you can rate the presentations. You can give us 5 stars. And if you don't give us 5 stars, I think I can find out exactly who you are. Thanks very much.
Thank you.